Over Father's Day weekend, I took the opportunity to visit Sandtoft Trolleybus Museum. This museum dates back all the way to 1969, actually predating the final trolleybus system closure, and it preserves dozens of trolleybuses, motorbuses and other artefacts from the era. I'm making this short video to document what you can find at the museum and also offer some personal thoughts on trolleybuses as a mode in general. The Sandtoft Trolleybus Museum has two main focuses: immersive displays of 1950s life and the trolleybuses themselves. There is a little model 1950s prefab decorated in the style of the time, and a street scene with 1980s storefronts, a nod to the South Yorkshire Electro line, a rabbit hole in itself. There's also a mini toy museum, and the biggest surprise for me, a recreation of a classic bicycle shop. There's also a small playground for the children, and on this day, the place also had a small classic car meet going on. You should always check to see if there are any side events happening on the day you decide to visit. The biggest side event at the museum is a bus tour of the local area, the Isle of Axholme, using a classic motor bus, in this case one from Doncaster City Transport. List departs at roughly hourly intervals later in the day. I didn't have the time to go on this tour, but the bus was very packed when I saw it leave, and the Isle of Axholme has quite a lot of history to it. So this tour, which I heard is about 30 minutes, may certainly be a great bonus to add on to your trip. That's all the side attractions, now for the trolleybuses themselves. Each trolleybus ride begins at a dedicated spot next to the street scene and goes around a circuit counterclockwise twice before turning around and going clockwise twice, taking about 5 minutes total and giving you a full tour of the museum grounds. As a UK museum, there's obviously a heavy focus on classic Sunbeam style trolleybuses. I think if you are already used to modern or classic trolleybus operations elsewhere, the fact that these are old school double-decker buses gives this a massive novelty factor that you just can't get anywhere else in the modern era. There are a few foreign preserved examples too. On this day, a classic trolleybus from Wellington, New Zealand was giving tours, and this is also the bus that the museum has slightly modified to be accessible to those with impaired mobility. I don't have a picture of it, but seeing this bus in a classic condition but fitted with an accessible seat that was obviously taken from a modern stagecoach bus was a bit funny. If you have never been on a trolleybus before, these vehicles are extremely smooth and quiet, even by modern standards. A fact I will go into in a bit more detail in a moment. The museum does lean towards the immersive side of the spectrum rather than the exhibit side. There is a small building dedicated to the history of trolleybuses in the Humberside area specifically, but otherwise the museum is quite light on text displays, though the volunteer staff here are excellent at explaining things if you do ask and strike up a conversation. If that's the kind of museum you prefer, you'll have a really good time at Sandtoft. I was here for about 2.5 hours, and that was enough to see everything at a reasonable pace, do 2 trolleybus rides, and visit the quite reasonably priced cafe for lunch. With the bus tour also available, I think I could have easily spent another hour or 2 here, and I could certainly return here in the future. Overall, entry for a single adult is £12, and that ticket is valid for a full year after your purchase, which I think is great value for a museum you could easily get several hours out of, and as a volunteer-run museum, it's all certainly for a good cause. So, a few more philosophical takeaways I got from the museum. The first thing I think really surprised me is just how quiet these trolleybuses were in operation. Obviously, they're electric vehicles that don't even have internal batteries, so they're going to be very quiet. But I don't think you realise just how quiet until you've been to a museum in quite a rural area with no city ambience. And at the end of the day, the motor bus they have starts up for the tour, and it's pretty much louder than everything else in the museum combined. If you're used to car noise as kind of an inevitable background aspect of cities, I think a visit to Sandtoft will kind of change your mind on that. The second thing I thought about is how trolleybus systems in the UK often directly replace trams. I will link to a website in the description that serves as a map of trolleybus systems, and you can notice that the crossover between former tram systems and former trolleybus systems are pretty much perfect. I think a lot of conversation about the demolishing of old school trams largely comes in the vein of how we think of the Pacific Electric. Like everywhere had trams, then motorbuses came along and they were demolished. But I think trolleybuses kind of show that isn't necessarily the case. I think it's easy to think of trams now as basically proper trains that run on streets. But I think it's important to remember that in the 1900s, a tram looked like this. And then you look at a trolleybus, which is kind of like an old school tram, but it's more flexible, blends into traffic better, and has less infrastructure requirements. I can definitely see how trolleybuses at the time may have been just a straight upgrade to trams. I'm not saying that trams wouldn't have improved and turned cities into Viennas or Amsterdams over time, but I think in the early 1900s, replacing trams with trolleybuses did actually make sense, and this museum helped to contextualise that for me. And my final question coming from the Trolleybus Museum is this. Why don't trolleybuses and BRT systems mix? Like sure, we have BRT systems with electric charging from pantographs, but if you look at any BRT system, you'll notice that they'll probably run on motor or battery electric buses. You get a brand new system like the Brisbane Metro, and that's running from batteries. And surely the route profile of BRT systems would be perfect for sticking up electric wires and just running trolleybuses on them. I had to do a bit of digging to find a trolleybus BRT system, and apparently Marrakesh built one. Good on you, Marrakesh. But overall, trolleybuses and BRT systems should mix more often. That is my take. Overall, I hope you enjoyed this museum review and a look at the nature of trolleybuses in general with my thoughts on. Have a nice day.